Welcome everyone. Today I'm going to discuss about the macroeconomics concept, and especially I do discuss about globalization and trade. Globalization is in the process by which the world previous isolated through the physical and technological distance become increasingly interconnected. What are the giant from international trade? Is what sense do barriers to trade protects American worker and companies? What are the cost of globalization? Are the cost worth it? Absolute advantage. The evidence that international trade confers overall benefit on economics in PT is strong. A country has an absolute advantage over another country if it can produce a given product using fairer resources than the other country need to use. If Canada can produce 100 lbs of beef using two ranchers, but it take Argentina three ranches. Canada has absolutely advantage over Argentina. Absolute advantage can be result of a country natural empowerments, Saudi Arabia, and well, competitive advantage. When a country can produce a good at a lower cost in terms of other goods, or when a country has a lower opportunity cost of production. The question is country of or company should ask with trade should be what do we give up produce this good. If Zambia produce copper, the resources it uses cannot be used to produce other goods such as corn. As a result, Zambia give up the opportunity to produce corn. Suppose it takes 10 hours of labor to mine a ton of copper in Zambia and 20 hours of labor to harvest a bushels of corn. This means the opportunity cost of producing a ton of copper is 2 bushels of corn. If Ryan can make more tacos in an hours that Shujan can make more tacos at a lower opportunity cost than Shujan has a comparative advantage in making tacos, both an absolute and comparative advantage in making tacos, absolute advantage in making tacos. What happens when a country has an absolute advantage in all goods? It's typically that for high income countries, they have all well educated worker, technologically advanced equipment, etc. These high income countries can produce all product with fewer resources than a low income country. If the high income country is more productive across the board, will there still be giant from trade? Trade is about a mutually beneficiary exchange. Even when one country has an absolute advantage in all product, trade can still benefit both sides. This is because Jan from trade come from specializing in one comparative advantage. Production possibilities and comparative advantage. Country number of workers needed of production 1000 in unit. Number of worker needed to the produce 1000 unit of refrigerator. Another one is cheese. United States 4 workers 1 worker. Mexico 5 workers 4 worker. Absolute advantage simply compare the productivity of a worker between countries. Comparative advantage identify the good for which the producer absolute advantage is relatively large and where the producer absolutely productivity disadvantage is relatively smaller. Mutual benefits trade with comparison advantage. When national increase production in the area of comparative advantage and trade with each other, both countries can benefit. The production possibility frontier is a useful tool to visualize the benefit. The production possibility frontier shows the maximum amount that each country can produce given its limited resources. Step 1, make a table similar to this one shops. Step 2, to calculate absolute advantage, look at the large of the number for each product. Step 3, to calculate comparative advantage, find the opportunity cost of the producing 1 barrel of oil in both countries. Step 4, calculate the opportunity cost of one lumbers by reversing the number with lumbers of the left side of the equation. Step 5, in this example, absolute advantage is the same as comparative advantage. Step 6, Canada should specialize in what it has a relative lower opportunity cost. What is lumbers? Venezuela should specialize in well. Trade income. Trade and income. Income depends on labor productivity. A country with an absolute advantage is some product has higher labor productivity. The average income is a country depends on its average labor productivity. Comparative advantage is more important than absolute advantage. Is understanding which country should trade with the product in order to maximize the standard of living in both countries. The prevalence of intra-industry trade between similar economy. The theory of comparative advantage suggests that each economy should specialize to a degree in certain products and then exchange those products. A high proportion of trade is intra-industry trade. Trade is good within the same industry from one country to another. The benefit of having workers with similar skills who work in other part of the world are the divisions of labor leads to learning, innovations, and unique skills, economic of skill. Jan, Jan from specialization and learning. Specialization in the world economy can be very finely split. In fact, recent years have seen a trend in international trade called splitting up the value chain. The value chain describes how a good is produced in a stage. In a state of production in a single large factory, all of the state of production can be split up among different farm operation in different places and even different countries. Because farms split up the value chain, international trade often does not involve while finished products. Inter-industry trade between similar countries produce economic giants because it allows workers and farms to learn and involve in particular product. Economic of scale, competitiveness, and variety. A second broad reason that intra-industry trade between similar nations produce economic giant involve economic of scales. The concept of economic of scales means that as the scales of output goes up, average cost of productions decline. The horizontal axis of the figure shows the quantity of production by a certain firm or at certain manufacturing plant. Economic of scale advantage. The concept of economic of scale becomes especially relevant to the international trade when it enables one or two large producers to supply the entire country. International trade provide a way of combinations the lower average production cost that come from economic of scales and still have competitive and variety for consumers. Large automobile factories in different countries can make and sell their products around the world. If the US automobile market was made up of only General Motors, Ford, and Chryslers, the level of competition and consumer choice would be quite a lot lower. Greater competition bring with it innovation and responsiveness to what consumer want. Dynamic comparative advantage. The source of giants from intra-industry trade between similar economy. In intra-industry trade, the level of worker productivity is not determined by the climate or geography. It is not even determined by the geographic level of education skills. Instead, the level of worker productivity is determined by how firm engage in specific learning about specialized product. In this vision, comparative advantage can be dynamic. It can evolve and engage over time as new skills are developed and as the value chain is split up in new ways. Demand and supply analysis of international trade. We can use the theory of supply and demand to further understanding the benefit of international trade. Consider two countries, Brazil and United States, who produce sugar. If international trade between Brazil and the US become possible, farm will want to buy chips in Brazil and sell at a higher price in US. Protectionism. Globalization had brought fear of loss of jobs and loss in income, which are other described as the race of the bottom. Globalization has also spawned fears about loss of cultures. Many countries worry about their cultures being overwhelmed by what of the United States. When a government legislation policies to reduce or block international trade, it is engaged in protectionism. Protectionism's policies often seeks to shake domestic producer and domestic workers from foreign competitors. The Trump administrated traffic on steels and aluminum in 2008 are a recent example. Barriers of trade. Protectionism takes three main core forms. Traffic are taxes that a government imposes on important goods and services, makes important more expensive, discourages purchase. Important quotas are numerical limitations on the quantity of the product that a country can improve. During the early 90s, the region administrator imposed a quota on the import of Japanese automobiles. Non-tariff barriers are all of other way that nations can draw up rules regulation, inspections, and paperwork to make it more costly or difficult to improve products. Textile made in the US could shift to another country, combined with the textile from another country, and they're shipped back to the US for final assembly. Trade-offs of international trade. The common belief among economics is that it is better to embrace the giant from trade then deal with the cost and trade-off with other policy tools instead of no trade at all. Most people who live in market-oriented economies would oppose trying to block better product that lower the cost of service. The economic analysis of the free trade does not rely on a belief that foreign trade is not disruptive or does not pose trade-offs. Disruptive market change happiness when a innovative new product or product technology disrupt the status quo in a market. The potential the giant from the trade way to special high among the smaller and low income countries of the country. From interpersonal to international trade, we all benefit from living in economic where people and the farm can specialize and trade with each others. The benefit of trade do not stop on at international boundaries. The division of labor could increase output for three reasons. Number one, workers with different characteristics can specialize in the type of production where they have a comparative advantage. Number two, farm and worker who specialize in a certain product become more productive with the learning and practice. Number three, economic of skill. These three reasons apply from the individuals and commonly live level right up to the international level. Reducing barriers to trade. At the end of the World War II, there was a census that tariffs were too high worldwide. Tariff reducings could stimulate international trade and returns the world to a peacetime economy. The General Agreement of the Tariff and Trade was established in 1947 by the UN to provide a forum in which nations could come together to negotiate reductions in traffic and other barriers to trade. In 1995, the GATT was transformed into the World Trade Organization. The GATT process was to negotiate an agreement to reduce barriers to trade, sign trade agreement, pause for a while, and then short negotiating the next generation. Here are some big examples of the negotiating rule of GATT and the World Trade Organization. In 1947, Geneva, they have tariff reduced 23 countries. 1949, NNC tariff reduced for 13 countries. 1951, Turkey tariff reduction 38 countries. 1956, Geneva tariff reduction 26 countries. In this way, 2001 agriculture, service, intellectual property, competitive investment, environment, disruptive statement 147. The World Trade Organization, the WTO is committed is lowering barriers of trade. The world national meet through the WTO to negotiate how they can reduce barrier to trade such as tariff. WTO negotiating happen in round where all countries negotiate on aggregate to encourage trade, take a year or two off, and then start negotiating a new agreement. Like a GATT before it, the WTO is not a world government with power of impose its decisions on other. The total staff of the WTO in 2013 is 629 people, and its annual budget is 196 million. Compared to large university, the budget is smaller in size. Regional trade agreement. Three type of economic integrations across the globe. Free trade agreement are when participants allow each other importance without tariff or quote. Common market is when participant even a common external trade policy. Economic union, in addition to a common market, monetary and fiscal policy are coordinated. The best known of this regional trading agreement is the European Union. For the United States, perhaps the best known regional trading agreement is North American Free Trade Agreement, which is known as NAFTA. Long-term in barrier to trade. Through all of the controversy with the trade policy, the general trend for most of the last 60 years is clearly towards lower barriers to trade. Although measures of important quota and non-tariff barriers are less exact than those for tariff, the general appears to be at lower levels too. The last half century has seen both a dramatic reductions in government created barriers to trade like tariff, important quota, and non-tariff barriers, a number of technological development that have made international trade easier, advantage in transportation, communication, and information management. The result has been the powerful surges of international trade. Quick overview. If we focus on the quick overview, we find what is absolute advantage and competitive advantage. How do you calculate absolute and comparative advantage? What are the two advantages of intra-industry trading? What is the relationship between economic of scales and intra-industry trade? How can you use supply and demand to explain the gain from trade? Why do governments justify protectionist policies? What are the trade barriers, including quota, tariff, and non-tariff barriers? What are the trade-offs of trade policy, and what are the two benefits from reducing trade barriers? The origin and the role of general agreement of tariff and trade. What is the origin and the role of World Trade Organization? What is the significance and example of regional trading agreement? Analyze trade policy and evaluate long-term trend in barrier to trade. These are the major things what is happening right now in the global trade. So we need to be very much focused on this global trade, and we need to be very much effective in that area. If we can make it in an effective way, then we can make maximum outcome from this point. So thank you everyone. If you have any kind of questions or anything, you can communicate with me and I will give you your answer. Thank you.